for chapter 4 of the virtual book club, reading Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games. I'm excited to jump into it with you. So I reread this chapter again last night just to make sure I was fresh on it because it had been a while since I annotated it. And I found a few additional things that I wanted to point out that dealt with Sunrise on the Reaping. When I originally read it in my first reread, I hadn't read Sunrise on the Reaping yet. So it colors how I see things a little differently. And minor spoilers if you haven't read Sunrise on the Reaping. Are you okay if I just read this? Here's where we pick up, and I'm just going to read straight from here. It says, for a few moments, Peeta and I take the scene of our mentor trying to rise out of the slippery vile stuff from his stomach. The reek of vomit and raw spirits almost brings my dinner up. We exchange a glance. Obviously, Haymitch isn't much, but Effie Trinket is right about one thing. Once we're in the arena, he's all we've got. And by some unspoken agreement, Peeta and I take one of Haymitch's arms and help him to his feet. So they're on the train, they've been reaped, and ultimately they're trying to help out their mentor, who is a drunk. And of course, we know why he drinks now. But the thing that I actually felt was the most compelling in this section was that she and Peeta have an unspoken agreement. And they didn't talk about this, but they both have compassion. They're very similar. They're a lot more alike than they realize. And so in a like-minded way, they lift Haymitch up and start to take care of him. I tripped. Haymitch asks, smells bad. He wipes his hand on his nose, smearing his face with vomit. Let's get you back to your room, says Peeta. Clean you up a bit. We half lead, half carry Haymitch back to his compartment since we can't exactly set him down on the embroidered bedspread. We haul him into the bathtub and turn the shower on, and he hardly notices. It's okay, Peeta says to me. I'll take it from here. So I wrote, what were Peeta's intentions here? If I were reading this with my students, I would probably stop and ask him, like, why might he want to take it from here? I think he probably feels a little bad. It's probably very obvious that Katniss is embarrassed. She, as he points out in Catching Fire, is very pure. And she says in Catching Fire at one point that the naked bodies used to bother her, but now they don't. So she probably does not want to see Haymitch naked. She's a 16-year-old girl, and those types of things have never been on the forefront of her mind. She's been, in that regard, very sheltered. So he's probably trying to be polite is what I might like coax out of them if I were reading this with them. I can't help feeling a little grateful since the last thing I want to do is strip down Haymitch, wash the vomit out of his chest hair, and tuck him into bed. Possibly Peeta is trying to make a good impression on him, to be his favorite once the games begin. That's not what he's doing, babe, but okay. But judging by the state he's in, Haymitch will have no memory of this tomorrow. She can't understand a non-transactional relationship, and I wrote that here in the margins. Those are some of the things that I might write or bring attention to if that's something that you're looking for, is a little tip on annotating. I try to highlight, I've read the book before, I would highlight things that stand out to me knowing how they play later. If I've never read the book before, I would highlight them and maybe ask questions so that I can go back and answer them. But I love that she doesn't understand a non-transactional relationship. Her favorite relationship outside of her and Prim is her and Gale, and her and Gale have a transactional relationship. It's very much, they learned how to hunt together, they taught each other things, they help each other survive. Peeta is kind, and we're going to see that play out, but she doesn't understand that yet. And I like how she says that he's probably trying to make a good impression to be his favorite once he's in the games. This is one of the examples of her being an unreliable narrator, not because she's a liar and not because we can't trust her, but because she doesn't understand anything out of her scope and her perspective. All right, I say, I can send one of the capital people to help you. There's a number on the train. Cooking for us, waiting on us, guarding us, taking care of us is their job. That's so interesting because we see such a big shift from Haymitch's book to this book in how many people there are and the type of luxury that the tributes are granted on a train. And it's also very different from the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and what Lucy and them experienced. No, I don't want them, says Peeta. I nod and I head to my own room. I understand how Peeta feels. I can't stand the sight of the capital people myself, but making them deal with Haymitch might be a small form of revenge. So I'm pondering the reason why he insists on taking care of Haymitch, and all of a sudden I think it's because he's being kind, just as he was kind to give me the bread. The idea pulls me up short. A kind Peeta Malark is far more dangerous to me than an unkind one. Kind people have a way of working their way inside me and rooting there. And I love the verbiage of rooting because she equates him with the dandelion, and dandelions have roots. You know, if you don't get like the whole root out, then the weed grows back. So the idea that his kindness has roots, that's really good. I can't let Peeta do this, not where we're going. So I decide from this moment on to have as little as possible to do with the baker's son. When I get back to my room, the train is pausing at a platform to refuel. I quickly open the window, toss the cookies that Peeta's father gave me out of the train, and slam the glass shut. No more of either of them. Unfortunately, the packet of cookies hits the ground and bursts open in a patch of dandelions by the track. If that's just not cosmic intervention, that's great. I love the karma there. This is another example of how the two of them were always fated to be endgame. They are a fated pair. They were going to be together. The universe keeps putting them together, and she tries to be rid of it, and boom, there's a whole field of dandelions. I only see the image for a moment because the train is off again, but it's enough to remind me of that other dandelion in the schoolyard years ago. I had just turned away from Peeta Millark's bruised face when I saw the dandelion, and I knew hope wasn't lost. I plucked it carefully and hurried home. I grabbed a bucket in Prim's hand and headed to the meadow, and yes, it was dotted with the golden-headed weeds. After we'd harvested those, we scrounged along inside the fence for probably a mile until we'd filled the bucket with the dandelion grains, stems, and flowers. That night, we gorged ourselves on dandelion salad and the rest of the bakery bread. What else? Prim asked me. What other food can we find? All kinds of things, I promised her. I just have to remember them. I like this because what does Lenore Dove call the meadow in Sunrise on the Reaping? I think she calls it like the meadow for the condemned. So her and her sister were almost condemned to death just through starvation. And she goes to that meadow, and instead of finding it to be a place of despair, she finds hope. My mother had a book that she brought with her from the apothecary shop. The pages were made of old parchment and covered in ink drawings of plants. Neat handwritten blocks told their names, where to gather them, when they came in bloom, their medical uses, but my father added other entries to the book. Plants for eating, not healing, dandelions, pokeweed, wild onions, pines, prim, and I spent the rest of the night poring over those pages. The next day we were off to school. For a while I hung around the edges of the meadow, but finally I worked up the courage to go under the fence. It was the first time I'd been there alone without my father's weapons to protect me, but I retrieved the small bow and arrows he'd made me from a hollow tree. I probably didn't go more than 20 yards into the woods that day. Most of the time, I perched up in the branches of an old oak, hoping for game to come by. After several hours, I had good luck to kill a rabbit. I'd shot a few rabbits before with my father's guidance, but this I'd done on my own. I like the parallel here that the first animal she kills and brings back to her family for sustenance on her own is a rabbit. And when she goes into the games later, just like Haymitch, the animal that she befriends is a rabbit. So again, it's just another good little note of what Suzanne Collins does to bring the text together in just little tiny ways. She's very subtle, and I love that about her. We hadn't had meat in months. The sight of the rabbit seemed to stir something in my mother. She roused herself, skinned the carcass, and made a stew with the meat and some more greens Prim had gathered. Then she acted confused and went back to bed. But when the stew was done, we made her eat a bowl. I wrote here, it's almost like her husband had returned. It's almost like she envisioned that he was back. She gets out of this catatonic state in order the sight of the rabbit seems to stir something inside of her. She rouses herself, she skins the carcass, she makes the stew. And then after the bodily motions that she has probably done a million times, things that are ingrained in her as a person, after she's done with them, she just slips back in to that traumatized state, that grief. And I think that this part is just so interesting because I just think it's like her body knew what to do from years of marriage, and it really breaks my heart. The woods became our savior, and each day I went a bit farther into its arms. It was slow going at first, but I was determined to feed us. I stole eggs from nests, caught fish in nets. Sometimes I managed to shoot a squirrel or a rabbit for stew, and I gathered the various plants that sprung up beneath my feet. Plants are tricky. Many are edible, but one false mouthful, and you're dead. I checked and double-checked the plants I harvested with my father's pictures. I kept us alive. Any sign of danger, a distant howl, the inexplicable break of a branch sent me flying back to the fence at first. And then I began to risk climbing trees to escape the wild dogs that quickly got bored and moved on. Bears and cats lived deeper in, perhaps disliking the sooty reek of our district. On May 8th, I went to the Justice Building, signed up for my tesserae, and pulled home my first batch of grain and oil and Prim's toy wagon. First of all, so I would probably say to my students, so what is May 8th? And I would try to make them make the connection that that must be her birthday because she is now of age to sign up for Tesserae. And we would go back and talk about Tesserae just quickly. But here is what I love, and I would probably try to bring their attention to. This is a really good juxtaposition and really good imagery. What does she bring the grain and the oil home in? Prim's toy wagon. Like the last bit of innocence and youth. And I would try to get them to see, like, what does a toy wagon symbolize to you? When you see a toy wagon outside of someone's house, what do you think? They have small children, and children are innocent. And she's pulling home this Tesserae, which is grain and oil. That's good. They need it. But in exchange, she has signed over her safety. And that is heartbreaking. On the 8th of every month, I was entitled to do the same. I wouldn't stop hunting and gathering, of course. The grain was not enough to live on. And there were other things to buy, soap and milk and thread. What we didn't absolutely have to eat, I began to trade at the hob. I was frightened to enter that place without my father at my side, but people had respected him and they accepted me. Game was game after all, no matter who shot it. I also sold at the back doors of the wealthier clients in town, trying to remember what my father had told me and learning a few new tricks as well. The butcher would buy rabbits, but not squirrels. The baker enjoyed squirrel, but only would trade for one if his wife wasn't around. The head peacekeeper loved wild turkey. We see that come back to play in Catching Fire. The mayor had a passion for strawberries. And no, the mayor doesn't have a passion for strawberries. The mayor's wife loved strawberries because Maisley Donner loved strawberry ice cream. Anyway, I love this because you're seeing Katniss in her element. She's going from place to place and she thinks that she's this person that people don't like, but they're all willing to trade with her. Yes, she has what they need, but I think that this shows too when she talks about how Peeta has the skills. Peeta can talk to people. Peeta is someone that the country would want to back in a rebellion. Honey, you were able to beg, borrow, and barter across all of District 12 and make really good connections with people. I think you're underselling your talking abilities. In late summer, I was washing up in a pond when I noticed the plants growing around me, tall with leaves like arrowheads, blossoms with 3 white petals. I knelt down in the water, my fingers digging into the soft mud, and I pulled up handfuls of the roots, small bluish tubers that don't look like much, but boiled or baked, they're as good as any potato. Katniss, I said aloud, it's the plant I was named for. And I heard my father's voice joking, as long as you can find yourself, you'll never starve. I spent hours stirring up the pond bed with my toes and a stick, gathering the tubers that floated to the top. That night we feasted on fish and Katniss roots until we were all, for the first time in months, full. If I were teaching this, what I would do is I would probably focus on a few key sentences, or I would direct kids to go to page 52, and I would want them to reanalyze the symbolism here. She is named after a plant, and I would basically want to ask them why. Why is that important? And I would want to make note of, as long as you can find yourself, you'll never starve. Why is that important? While she does set traps and whatnot, she exclusively likes to hunt with a bow and arrow. So the fact that they are arrow-headed plants is just an extra notch that's so wonderful. But I would really want them to focus on her father saying, as long as you can find yourself, you'll never starve, because I think this is just so much deeper. Like, don't lose yourself. Slowly, my mother returned to us. She began to clean and cook and preserve some of the food I brought in for winter. People traded us or paid money for her medical remedies. One day, I heard her singing. So one, obviously, her husband used to sing. That was something he was hugely known for. And also, I love the parallel to Katniss singing at the end of Mockingjay when she is locked up for a very long time after shooting President Coin. And the idea that she is singing, that's a really good parallel. Prim was thrilled to have her back, but I kept watching, waiting for her to disappear on us again. I didn't trust her. One of the big themes I would explore throughout this text, if I were teaching it with students, is the idea of trust and the idea of security. And some small gnarled place inside of me hated her for her weakness, for her neglect, for the months she had put us through. Prim forgave her, but I had taken a step back from my mother, put up a wall to protect myself from needing her, and nothing was ever the same between us again. She had this beautiful example. Her mother and her father were deeply in love. They were a beautiful couple. In Mockingjay, when her mother is scolding her for singing The Hanging Tree, she says, my mom never yelled. So her parents didn't even fight, and they never hit the children. So she has this shining example, and when her father dies, she sees what that love can do to someone. And I think this is so important because it almost makes her have reservations. I think it's one of the reasons that she can't see herself having children, obviously because of the reaping, but she also can't see herself being married or falling in love. But beyond that, I almost want to say, like, can you imagine being her and being like, what good is love? What did that ever get anybody? It crushed my mother, made her a shell of a person. Now, I was going to die without that ever being set right. I thought of how I had yelled at her today in the Justice Building. I had told her I loved her too, though, so maybe it would all balance out. For a while, I stand staring out the train window, wishing I could open it again, but unsure of what would happen at such high speeds. In the distance, I see the lights of another district, 7, 10, I don't know. I think about the people in their houses, settling in for bed. I imagine my home with its shutters drawn tight. What are they doing now, my mother and Prim? Were they able to eat supper? The fish stew and the strawberries, or did it lie untouched on their plates? Did they watch the recap of the day's events on the battered old TV that sits at the table against the wall? Surely there were more tears. Is my mother holding up, being strong for Prim? Or has she already started to slip away, leaving the weight of the world on my sister's fragile shoulders? Prim will undoubtedly sleep with my mother tonight. The thought of that scruffy old buttercup posting himself on the bed to watch over Prim comforts me. If she cries, he will nose his way into her arms and curl up there until she calms down and falls asleep. I'm so glad I didn't drown him. I love this too because Buttercup takes care of Katniss at the end of Mockingjay. Imagining my home makes me ache with loneliness. This day has been endless. Could Gale and I have been eating blackberries only this morning? It seems like a lifetime ago, like a long dream that deteriorated into a nightmare. Maybe if I go to sleep, I will wake back up in District 12, where I belong. Probably the drawers hold any number of nightgowns, but I just strip off my shirt and pants and I climb into bed in my underwear. The sheets are made of soft, silky fabric. A thick, fluffy comforter gives immediate warmth. If I'm going to cry now, it's the time to do it. By morning, I'll be able to wash the damage done by the tears from my face, but no tears come. I'm too tired or too numb to cry, but the only thing I feel is a desire to be somewhere else, so I let the train rock me into oblivion. Gray light is leaking through the curtains when the rapping rouses me. I hear Effie Trinket's voice, calling me to rise. Up, 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 it's going to be a big, big, big day. I try to imagine for a moment what it must be like inside that woman's head. What thoughts fill her waking hours? What dreams come to her at night? I have no idea. I love the insight we got on Sunrise and the Reaping, where she says that it's so important to be positive because you see her here being positive. I put the green outfit back on since it's not really dirty, just slightly crumpled from spending the night on the floor. My fingers trace the circle around the little gold mockingjay, and I think of the woods and my father and of my mother and Prim waking up, having to get on with things. I slept in the elaborate braided hair my mother did for the reaping, and it doesn't look too bad, so I just leave it up. It doesn't matter. We can't be far from the capital now, and once we reach the city, my stylist will dictate my look for the opening ceremonies tonight anyway. I just hope I get someone who doesn't think nudity is the last word in fashion. As I enter the dining car, Effie Trinket brushes by me with a black cup of coffee. She's muttering obscenities under her breath. Haymitch, his face puffy and red from the previous day's indulgences, is chuckling. Peeta holds a roll and looks somewhat embarrassed. Sit down, says Haymitch, waving me over. The moment I slide into my chair, I'm served an enormous platter of food. Eggs, ham, piles of fried potatoes. A tureen of fruit sits in ice to keep it chilled. A basket of rolls that they have set before me would keep my family going for a week. There's an elegant glass of orange juice. At least I think it's orange juice. I've only even tasted an orange once at New Year's when my father brought one as a special treat. They don't have a religion in Panem, so I think it's interesting that the holidays that they celebrate are few and far between, and one of them is New Year's. A cup of coffee. My mother adores coffee, which we could almost never afford, but it only tastes bitter and thin to me. A rich brown cup of something I've never seen. They call it hot chocolate, says Peeta. It's good. I love that he determines it's good before she has a chance to taste it. It almost makes me think of like having a child, right? If I say this is delicious and then they taste it and they might say this is delicious. So she likes the hot chocolate. We know that because we've read it before. But the idea that he is reaffirming that. I take a sip of the hot, sweet, creamy liquid and a shudder runs through me. Even though the rest of the meal beckons, I ignore it until I've drained my cup, and then I stuff down every mouthful I can hold, which is a substantial amount, being careful not to overdo it on the richest stuff. One time, my mother told me that I always eat like I'll never see food again, and I said I won't unless I bring it home. And that shut her up. When my stomach feels like it's about to split open, I lean back and take in my breakfast companions. Peeta is still eating, breaking off bits of roll and dipping them into hot chocolate. Hold on to that. Haymitch hasn't paid much attention to his platter, but he's knocking back a glass of red juice that he keeps thinning with a clear liquid from a bottle. Judging by the fumes, it's some kind of spirit. I don't know Haymitch, but I've seen him often enough in the hob, tossing handfuls of money on the counter of the woman who sells white liquor. He'll be incoherent by the time we reach the capital. I realize I detest Haymitch. No wonder the District 12 tributes never stand a chance. It isn't just that we've been underfed and have a lack of training. Some of our tributes have still been strong enough to make a go of it, but we rarely get sponsors, and he's a big part of the reason why. The rich people who back tributes, either because they're betting on them or simply for the bragging rights of picking a winner, expect someone classier than Haymitch to deal with. So you're supposed to give us advice? I say to Haymitch. Here's some advice. Stay alive, says Haymitch, and then bursts out laughing. I exchange a look with Peeta before I remember I'm having nothing to do with him. I'm surprised to see the hardiness in his eyes. He generally seems so mild. That's very funny, says Peeta, and suddenly he lashes out at the glass in Haymitch's hand. It shatters on the floor, sending the blood-red liquid running toward the back of the train. Only not to us. Haymitch considers this for a moment, and then he punches Peeta in the jaw. And if I were reading this to kids, I'd pause there. Knocking him from his chair. When he turns back to reach for the spirits, I drive my knife into the table between his hand and the bottle, barely missing his fingers. I brace myself to deflect his hit, but it doesn't come. Oh my gosh, he doesn't hit her because it's Burdock's daughter. Oh, instead he sits back and he squints at us. And I wrote, does he see Burdock here? Like, does that feistiness remind him of Burdock? Peeta rises from the floor, a handful of ice from under the fruit tureen. He starts to raise it to the red mark on his jaw. Now this is something that's all over TikTok, so I'm sure you've seen this before, but it's really upsetting to know that like he's injured and knows immediately what to do. He doesn't even care, and it's because his mother beats the crap out of him all the time. I would probably, if I were teaching this to my students, say something like, why does he react that way? Has he been hit before? And I'd want to clue them in on this and get them to tell it to me. No, says Haymitch, stopping him. Let the bruise show. The audience will think you've mixed it up with another tribute before you've even made it to the arena. He's painting a poster for Peeta. He is working perception just like he did for himself. So when he was the bootlegger and the rascal, it was a perception that he was playing. And here he is saying, they'll think you've mixed it up with another tribute before you've even got to the arena. That's against the rules, says Peeta. Only if they catch you, that bruise will say that you fought. You weren't caught. Even better, says Haymitch. Man. He turns to me. Can you hit anything with that knife besides a table? The bow and arrow is my weapon, but I've spent a fair amount of time throwing knives as well. Sometimes if I've wounded an animal with an arrow, it's better to get a knife into it too before I approach it. I realize that if I want Haymitch's attention, this is my moment to make an impression. I yank the knife out of the table, get a grip on the blade, and then throw it into the wall across the room. I was actually just hoping to get a good solid stick, but it lodges into the seam between the two panels, making me look a lot better than I am. Stand over there, both of you, says Haymitch, nodding to the middle of the room. We obey, and he circles us, prodding us like animals at times, checking our muscles, examining our faces. Well, you're not entirely hopeless. Seem fit. And once the stylists get a hold of you, you'll be attractive enough. Pete and I don't question this. The Hunger Games aren't a beauty contest, but the best-looking tributes always seem to pull more sponsors. All right, I'll make a deal with you. You don't interfere with my drinking, and I'll stay sober enough to help you, says Haymitch. But you have to do exactly what I say. It's not much of a deal, but it's still a giant step forward from 10 minutes ago when we had no guide at all. Fine, says Peeta. So help us, I say. When we get to the arena, what's the best strategy at the cornucopia for someone? One thing at a time. In a few minutes, we'll be pulling up to the station. You'll be put in the hands of your stylist. You're not going to like what they do to you, but no matter what it is, don't resist, says Haymitch. But I begin, no buts. Don't resist, says Haymitch. He takes a bottle of spirits from the table and leaves the car. As the door swings shut behind him, the car goes dark. There are still a few lights inside, but outside, it's as if night has fallen again. I realize we must be in a tunnel that runs up through the mountains into the capital. The mountains form a natural barrier between the capital and the eastern districts. It is almost impossible to enter from the east except through the tunnels. This geographical advantage was a major factor in the districts losing the war that led to my being a tribute today. This is important. World building, it can be hard for younger students and even for people. So taking a minute to reflect on the location and why they built it there, and really thinking through the fact that, a lot of people are theorizing that it's in Utah, maybe looking at a map, that could be beneficial for some students. Since the rebels had to scale the mountains, they were easy targets for the capital's air forces. Peeta, Malark, and I stand in silence as the train speeds along. The tunnel goes on, and I think of the tons of rock separating me from the sky, and my chest tightens. I hate being encased in stone in this way. It reminds me of the mines and my father, trapped, unable to reach sunlight, buried forever in the darkness. The train finally begins to slow, and suddenly, bright light floods the compartment. We can't help it. Both Peeta and I run to the window to see what we've only seen on television. The capital, the ruling city of Panem. The cameras haven't lied about its grandeur. If anything, they've not quite captured the magnificence of the glistening buildings in the rainbow of hues that tower into this air. The shiny cars that roll down the wide paved streets, the oddly dressed people with bizarre hair and painted faces who have never missed a meal. All the colors seem artificial. The pinks, too deep. The greens, too bright. The yellows, painful to the eyes. Like the flat, round discs of hard candy we can never afford to buy at the tiny sweet shop in District 12. The people begin to point at us eagerly as they recognize a tribute train rolling into the city. I step away from the window, sickened by their excitement, knowing they can't wait to watch us die. But Peeta holds his ground, actually waving and smiling at the gawking crowd. He only stops when the train pulls into the station, blocking us from their view. That's so interesting. I am doing my Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes reread, and when they pull into the station, it takes a while to load them off of the train. The train has no windows. No one is there to watch this spectacle but Coriolanus. So I feel like he took that inspiration and made it even more of a circus. He sees me staring at him and shrugs. Who knows, he says. One of them may be rich. I have misjudged him. I think of his actions since the reaping began, the friendly squeeze of my hand, his father showing up with the cookies and promising to feed Prim. And Peeta, did Peeta put him up to that? His tears at the station, volunteering to wash Haymitch, but then challenging him this morning when apparently the nice guy approach had failed. And now the waving at the window, already trying to win the crowd. All of the pieces are fitting together, but I sense that he has a plan forming. He hasn't accepted his death. He is already fighting hard to stay alive, which also means that kind Peeta Malark, the boy who gave me the bread, is fighting hard to kill me. I love how she paces the book, where I feel like every chapter leaves you wanting to start the next one. It makes it really great for teaching as well. There are my thoughts on chapter 4 of The Hunger Games. I'm so thankful to have you here. If you have not, please subscribe. Please follow along. I'll see you for chapter 5 soon.